The windmill turned for the first time in 43 years on a Tuesday morning in June, and when it did, water, clear, cold, impossible, poured from a pipe everyone said was dead. Nadia Osman stood in mud that shouldn't exist, watching her neighbors sprint across the dry fields toward her property line, and knew everything was about to change. 3 months earlier, the auction in Cimarron County, Oklahoma, lasted 4 minutes. Property 19-014-227, 80 acres, March 3, 2024, 2:17 p.m. The courthouse steps were concrete and hot, even in early spring. Abandoned farmland, the auctioneer said, voice flat. No structures, no water rights, windmill collapsed. Soil erosion severe. Wind damage extensive. Do I hear $20? Nadia Osman, 26 years old, held 17 $1 bills folded in her jacket pocket. Everything left after paying for her grandfather's funeral and the Greyhound bus from Minneapolis. Around her, 3 men in Carhartt jackets washed with expressions somewhere between pity and amusement. $17, she said. Silence. Then one man laughed. Not cruel, just surprised. Sold for $17 to bidder 41. She signed the deed in a room with fluorescent lights and water-stained ceiling tiles. The clerk, a woman named Pauline with reading glasses on a chain, slid the papers across. You're Yasser Osman's granddaughter? Yes, ma'am. He was a good man. Worked the grain elevator 30 years. Pauline's voice softened. You know this land hasn't grown anything since the drought in '06? Wind took most of the topsoil. What's left is hardpan and regret. Nadia nodded. Her grandfather had died in January, in a cold apartment in Minnesota, 1,000 miles from the Oklahoma panhandle where he'd grown up. He'd worked the elevator, saved every dollar, lost his own family's farm before Nadia was born. He'd left her 2 things, $17 in an envelope marked for the land, and a metal tackle box with no key, just a combination lock. The combination was written inside her grandmother's wedding ring, which she'd never met. 1948. Inside the box, a leather journal water-stained and sun-faded, a hand-drawn map on graph paper, and a letter in her grandfather's careful handwriting. The wind took everything from us, but the wind also gifts. The others built wrong, they fought it. You must learn to use it. The old windmill on parcel 19-014-227 was my father's design. Everyone said it was foolish. They were wrong. The answer is in the journal, pages 31 to 38. Do not try to explain. Let the wind speak. She drove out that afternoon in a borrowed Honda Civic that belonged to a church volunteer who'd felt sorry for her at the funeral. The land was flat, broken, and endless. Bare earth, scattered sage, fence posts leaning like broken teeth. The windmill stood in the center, a skeleton of rust and collapsed blades, 50 feet tall, tower twisted, the wooden platform rotted through. She walked the entire property. 2 hours, 17 minutes. The wind never stopped. Constant, pushing, personal. It carried dust that got in her teeth. The earth was hard as concrete in places, loose and blowing in others. Every step felt like trespassing on a graveyard. That night, in a motel room that cost $32 she didn't have, Nadia opened the journal by lamplight. Her grandfather's handwriting, copied from something older, his father's notes, her great-grandfather's engineering. Detailed drawings of the windmill, not a standard farm design, but something modified. The blades angled different. The gear ratios altered. Below, calculations in faded pencil, wind speeds, water table depths, pumping capacity, and a single line circled in red ink. The wind here never stops. That is the advantage they could not see. Pages 31 to 38 showed a restoration plan. Not rebuilding, too expensive, but repair, strategic and specific. Which parts mattered, which didn't. How to straighten the tower using tension cables and a come-along. How to rebuild the pump mechanism using scrap parts. The drawings were precise, measurements, angles, materials. At the bottom of page 38, 3 months of work for one person. No money needed if you are clever and patient. The water is there, 40 feet down. The well was never dry. The pump was just broken. The next morning she returned to the property with tools from the church volunteer. A toolbox he said she could keep, a come-along, a welding mask, an extension cord that reached from the road to the windmill. The first neighbor arrived within an hour. Bobby Kern, 54, fourth-generation wheat farmer, pulled up in a white Dodge with a trailer hitch. You're the one who bought the wind wreck. Yes, sir. He looked at the collapsed windmill, at her standing there with a wrench. What are you planning to do? Fix it. His face did something complicated. Miss, that windmill hasn't pumped water since 1981. Your great-grandfather built it with some kind of experimental design. Everybody told him it wouldn't work. It ran for maybe 10 years. Then something broke, and he couldn't fix it. He died trying. Nadia said nothing. Even if he could fix it, there's no water. The whole aquifer dropped 30 feet since the 80s. This land is done. Thank you for the information, Nadia said quietly. He left shaking his head. She started working. The tower took 6 weeks to straighten. Nadia worked alone, dawn to dark, using the come-along to apply tension while the wind fought her. Every bolt was rusted. Every joint was seized. She soaked them in penetrating oil. She bought 1 can at a time from the hardware store in town, paying with coins. The hardware store owner, a man named Curtis with forearms like fence posts, started giving her advice. That's a 5/8 bulk you need, not half-inch. Here, take this box. They're old stock. No charge. I can pay. Nobody can pay for stuff that's been sitting on my shelf since '92. You're doing me a favor. The second neighbor came in April. Maria Santos, 38, ran a cattle operation on the adjacent section. She brought water in a cooler and watched Nadia work for 20 minutes before speaking. You're Yasser's granddaughter. Yes, ma'am. He used to come to county meetings. Never said much, but when he talked, people listened. Maria poured water into a cup and handed it over. What are you doing here? My grandfather left me this land. And instructions. Maria studied the windmill. Instructions for what? How to fix it. Honey, I don't want to discourage you, but this county is dying. We've had 3 years of drought. The young people leave. The old people sell. I'm hanging on by my teeth. Even if you get that thing turning, there's no water to pump. Nadia drank the water carefully. My great-grandfather thought there was. Your great-grandfather died broke and bitter. After Maria left, Nadia climbed the tower. The ladder rungs still solid, tested one at a time, and stood on the platform 60 feet up. The wind was huge here, pushing, constant. She could see 3 counties. Dust devils danced in the distance. The land looked dead, but the journal said otherwise. She descended and started on the pump mechanism. The shaft was seized, 43 years of rust and mineral deposits. She worked it with oil and patience, turning it 1 degree at a time. Her hands blistered, then calloused. She lost weight she didn't have to lose. The motel owner, a widow named Betty, started leaving her supper in a paper sack by the door. No charge, no questions. By May, the tower was straight. The blades, rebuilt from scrap metal and wood Curtis gave her, were attached. The pump mechanism turned freely. But connecting everything, that was the engineering. The journal showed the gear ratios. Her great-grandfather's design used the wind's constancy, not its strength. The blades turned slow but steady, steered down through a mechanism that looked inefficient but was actually brilliant. Every rotation of the blade translated to 4 strokes of the pump. In wind that never stopped, that meant continuous pumping. She assembled it following the drawings exactly. When she was done, the windmill looked wrong, blades at an odd angle, gears exposed, the whole thing awkward and improvised. Curtis came out to see it. That's the damnedest thing. It looks like it was built by someone who didn't know what they were doing. My great-grandfather had a degree in engineering from Oklahoma State. 1947. Curtis was quiet. I didn't know that. Nobody did. He was Somali. People made assumptions. On May 28th, Nadia engaged the clutch mechanism. The windmill's blades caught wind and began to turn. Slow, steady, inevitable. The gears clicked. The pump shaft moved. Nothing happened. She checked every connection. Everything was right. The pump was moving. The pipe descended into the well casing. But no water came. That night in the motel, she read the journal again. Page 37. A note in the margin she'd missed. First pumping may take hours. The column must fill. Be patient. The water is there. The next morning, Bobby Kern was waiting at the property line. I heard you got it turning. Yes, sir. But no water. Not yet. His expression was kind but final. There won't be. I'm sorry, but I'll make you an offer. $500 for the land. That's 30 times what you paid. You can go home. This is home, Nadia said. He left, without another word. She sat by the windmill all day, watching the blades turn, hearing the pump stroke down and up, down and up. Hours passed. The sun crossed the sky. The wind never stopped. At 4:37 p.m., the pipe coughed. At 4:39, water, clear, cold, real, gushed from the outlet. Nadia stood in the growing puddle, hands shaking, and watched water pool in earth that hadn't seen it in decades. The puddle became a stream. The stream spread across 30 feet of hard pan, soaking in, darkening the dust. She called Curtis. "It's working." "I'll be damned," he said, and 20 minutes later his truck appeared, then Maria's, then 3 others. They stood in a semicircle and watched Oklahoma aquifer water pour from a windmill everyone said was dead. Bobby Kern arrived last. He stood there for a full minute without speaking. Then, "How deep is it pumping from?" 40 feet. "That's below where everyone else drills." "How did your great-grandfather know?" "He studied geology. He mapped the subsurface before anyone else understood it." Nadia touched the windmill tower. He wasn't wrong. Everyone else just stopped listening. By June, the water had transformed 60 feet of land around the windmill. Nadia planted what her grandfather's journal recommended, not wheat or corn, but drought-tolerant crops tested in Somalia and adapted for Oklahoma. Sorghum varieties that needed minimal water, tepary beans, cowpeas. She used drip irrigation made from salvaged parts, every drop measured. The windmill pumped 8 gallons per minute, 16 hours a day when the wind blew, which was always. The plants grew in concentric circles around the water source, green against brown earth, impossible and real. Curtis gave her seeds he'd been saving for no reason he could explain. Maria brought fence posts and helped her protect the growing area from cattle and rabbits. Even Bobby Kern stopped by, looked at the sorghum, and said, "I'll be damned," which was becoming his standard response. But the real change came when the drought deepened in July. 3 weeks without rain. Temperatures over 100 degrees. The county extension service issued warnings. Farmers watched their wells drop, their irrigation systems trouble. Cattle clustered in shrinking shadows. The land cracked. Nadia's windmill kept turning. Her plants stayed green. On July 19th, Bobby Kern walked across the property line without calling first. "Nadia, I need to ask you something, and I'm not proud of it." "Okay. My cattle tanks are getting low. My well is pulling air half the time. I've got 60 head and nowhere to move them." He took off his hat, wiped his forehead. "Could I buy water from you? I'll pay whatever's fair." Nadia thought about her grandfather, about Bobby's words at the auction, "Nobody can pay," about pride and survival. "You can have water. No charge. Bring your tanks." "I can't just take it." "Yes, you can." He brought his water truck that afternoon, filled it from her outlet. His hands shook slightly when he shook hers. Maria came next, then the Jensens from the northwest section, then a young couple, barely older than Nadia, who'd just bought land and were terrified their first year would be their last. By August, Nadia was supplying water to 7 farms. Not selling it, sharing it, on a schedule, managed carefully so the windmill's output stretched across everyone's need. She kept records in a notebook, tracking flow rates and usage. Nobody took advantage. Everyone arrived on time, took only what they'd arranged, thanked her quietly. The county extension agent came in mid-August. His name was Michael Torres, 42, with a graduate degree from Texas A&M. He walked the property with a GPS unit and a soil probe. "Miss Osman, I need to understand what you're doing here. Pumping water, growing food, helping neighbors. You're pumping from a depth most farmers don't access. Your windmill design is unconventional. Your crops are species I've never seen grown commercially in Oklahoma." He pulled out a tablet. "I'd like to document this. The county needs to know it's possible." Nadia hesitated. "My great-grandfather tried to show people this design in the 50s. They called it impractical." Torres's face went still. "What was his name?" "Ahmed Osman. He immigrated in 1946. Engineering degree from OSU, 1947. He designed this windmill in 1968. Jesus," Torres said softly. "I found references to him in old county records. I thought it was a dead end, some experimental farmer who failed. He didn't fail. His pump broke, and he didn't have money to fix it. He died trying." Torres was quiet for a long moment, looking at the turning blades, at the green crops, at the notebook in Nadia's hand that tracked water distribution. Will you let me tell the story? Properly. Nadia thought about her grandfather's words. Do not try to explain. Let the wind speak. The wind had spoken. Now maybe people would listen. Yes, she said. By September, the Extension Service article had reached 12,000 farmers across Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. Nadia received 47 phone calls, 23 emails, and 8 visitors asking about the windmill design. She shared everything freely, her great-grandfather's drawings, the gear ratios, the pumping calculations. 3 farmers built versions on their own land. 2 worked. 1 needed adjustment, and Nadia drove 4 hours to help troubleshoot it. Bobby Kern approached her in late September. I've been thinking. That land southeast of yours, it's mine, 40 acres, same hardpan as you started with. I want to lease it to you for $1 a year. Build another windmill, grow more food. I'll help. Maria added 60 acres 2 weeks later. Same terms. Same offer to help. By October, Nadia was farming 180 acres. She'd hired 2 part-time workers, locals who needed income and were willing to learn. The sorghum harvest brought in enough to pay for materials for 3 more windmills. Curtis helped her build them. Teenagers from the high school came out on weekends to learn welding and basic engineering. And Douglas Trent from Central Valley AG Partners came in November. Same company from every story, different region. He drove a black SUV and wore boots that had never seen mud. Miss Osman, we're interested in licensing your windmill design. We'd like to install 50 units across our panhandle operations. We'll pay you $1,500 per installation for consulting. $75,000. Nadia's hands were steady. The design isn't mine to license. It's my great-grandfather's, and he's dead. It belongs to anyone who needs it. We're prepared to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. The drawings are public record now. Build as many as you want. But if you need help, my consulting rate is $200 a day, and the money goes into a fund for farmers who can't afford materials. Trent left looking confused. On December 15th, Nadia stood by the original windmill, blades turning steady, water flowing into irrigation lines that fed crops growing in soil everyone had called dead. Around her, the land was still harsh, still dry, still wind-scoured. But green circles marked 7 properties now, water pumping, food growing. She pulled out her grandfather's journal, opened to the last page. His handwriting, shaky near the end. My father died believing he had failed. I worked 30 years to save enough to prove he hadn't. I'm sorry I couldn't finish it. But you have his mind, his stubbornness, his gift. The wind never stops in Oklahoma. That was never our curse. It was always our blessing. Show them. Nadia wrapped the journal carefully and looked across the land her $17 had bought. Her great-grandfather's windmill turned against a winter sky, pulling water from stone, feeding neighbors, proving that patience and knowledge and wind could outlast drought, mockery, and despair. She smiled, small and private, and went to check the irrigation schedule. Spring planting would start in 3 months, and she had 180 acres to plan for. The wind never stopped. Neither would she.